You're listening to 17 Carat K-Pop, the podcast that's a little bit of everything with a K-pop twist. From pop culture critiques to the history of K-pop to interviews with people in the K-pop industry and K-pop artists themselves, to concert and album reviews, to a deep dive into the discographies of different K-pop artists, to K-pop news updates, to stories about the music industry more broadly. This show tries to cover everything about K-pop and K-pop as it applies to the larger music and concert scenes. Visit 17caratkpop.weebly.com for more information about the show. That's 17caratkpop.weebly.com. Hello everybody and welcome back to 17 Carat K-Pop. Today on the show we are continuing our exploration of different literature and movie references throughout BTS's work, the work that has inspired them, the work alluded to throughout their music video universe, all things BTS sources of inspiration. And today we're going to break down the significance of a philosophical experiment, a thought experiment that takes the form of a short story BTS references throughout the music video for Spring Day and throughout their music video storyline in general. Once you read between the lines of this short story, it really makes sense in context. Today we're talking about The One Who Walks Away from Omelas by Ursula Le Guin. This story is divided up into three key sections. Part 1 is just the super happy description of a town where everyone is happy and they're having this festival, this summer celebration. The author describes the town in super vague terms intentionally. Throughout her description, she talks about it as if it could be anyone's town. So you're not supposed to think of it in a specific relatable context, but relatable because it's a broad enough characterization to be applicable no matter who you are and where you live. Part 2 looks at the harrowing description in graphic detail that I will not go into on this episode of a young child who is forced to live in this dark, empty place neglected, abandoned by the town. And that's ultimately the trade-off that we see, is that this town can be this utopia where everyone's happy all the time, everyone is just thriving and feeling their best, but in exchange for that, they had to make one child suffer forever. So that was the trade-off. You can all be happy. The majority can be happy if the minority suffers. So part 1 is the happy summer festival. Part 2 describes the horrible conditions this child is being kept in. And part 3 focuses on the reactions of the townspeople when they get old enough to be taught the story and they find out the truth about their town and what they're doing to that child. That part at the end is when they describe their reaction, and some people just go about their day. Others can't take the guilt of living in that kind of town and having all that happiness at the expense of anyone. Even if it's just one person, they don't think that's a fair trade-off, and so they have to leave the town in an act of defiance. There's a lot in this passage to unpack, and trust me, it will be worth the long delivery. Quote, "Yet I repeat that these were not simple folk, not dulcet shepherds, noble savages, bland utopians. They were not less complex than us. The trouble is that we have a bad habit, encouraged by pedants and sophisticates, of considering happiness as something rather stupid. Only pain is intellectual, only evil interesting. This is the treason of the artist, a refusal to admit the banality of evil and the terrible boredom of pain. If you can't lick 'em, join 'em. If it hurts, repeat it. But to praise despair is to condemn delight. To embrace violence is to lose hold of everything else. We have almost lost hold. We can no longer describe a happy man nor make any celebration of joy. How can I tell you about the people of Omelas? They were not naive and happy children, though their children were, in fact, happy. They were mature, intelligent, passionate adults whose lives were not wretched. Oh, miracle! But I wish I could describe it better. I wish I could convince you. Omelas sounds, in my words, like a city in a fairy tale. Long ago and far away, once upon a time. Perhaps it would be best if you imagined it as your own fancy bids, assuming it will rise to the occasion, for certainly I cannot suit you all. For instance, how about technology? I think that there would be no cars or helicopters in and above the streets. This follows from the fact that the people of Omelas are happy people. Happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary. What is neither necessary nor destructive and what is destructive. In the middle category, however, that of the unnecessary but undestructive, that of comfort, luxury, exuberance, etc., they could perfectly well have central heating, subway trains, washing machines, and all kinds of marvelous devices not yet invented here. Floating light sources, fuelless power, a cure for the common cold, or they could have none of that. It doesn't matter. Unquote. There are a couple different parts of this I really want to focus on now. First of all, let's talk about those first few sentences where she says, "These were not simple people in this town. I'm describing them as happy-go-lucky, but that doesn't imply that they're stupid or they're not they don't have these intellectual depths. Just because they're happy doesn't mean they're just a ditzy character in this story." It's interesting how she points out how there is this preoccupation with telling the backstories of villains. This is actually often the case in movies, if you think about it. All of these villains get an elaborate backstory or a spin-off movie, and they are viewed as the character most intriguing, and that is often the case, but why are they written that way? Why are they so intriguing to people at the expense of someone who is just quote-unquote the hero in the story? The goody two-shoes are viewed as not super interesting characters, and it's an interesting dichotomy that she calls out, that we assume we have to, if we love learning more about these villains, it's at the expense of taking time to learn more about the heroes and unwrapping layers in their personalities. It's a lot reminiscent of our conversation on the last BTS Study Guide episode, talking about Demian, about how the book really calls out the fact that things are treated as this and that when it's not the case. And that black and white thinking is just what she calls the treason of the artist, to just follow that assumption that, yeah, I guess evil is interesting and not boring. And she actually calls it quite boring, and maybe we should invest our time and focus on the do-gooders. And she points out polarization, saying, but to praise despair is to condemn delight. Like, you can't have this extreme without the other in the world. In Damien, they set up this concept of black and white thinking about the world is all good or all bad as something that people never understand how to deal with and meet in the middle and fly to Abraxas, as they said. Whereas here, she's saying kind of the same thing, but in a way that implies there is never the chance to meet in the middle. Not that that is something to strive for, but that they can't even strive for it. They don't know that's a legitimate, important thing to strive for. She's being critical of a society and doesn't seem very optimistic that they will take her advice. She says we can no longer describe someone happy, nor make a celebration of joy, because that would be criminalized. She said happiness is based on a just discrimination of what is necessary. What is neither necessary nor destructive. That is really interesting, how she says happiness is found in the middle. The middle category, the source of our happiness, is in between the extremes of we need to have this in our lives and we absolutely need to kick this out of our lives. But in the middle, she calls things that are unnecessary but undestructive, and that's where true happiness lies. If we're picturing this happy, fanciful town where everyone's in a good mood, you can picture it with technology if you want. It's not the ultimate evil of a town. It's kind of like a reverse Ray Bradbury she's doing here, basically not trying to critique a technologically advanced society, but critique anyone who decides to glamorize that at the extent of viewing its downsides or vice versa. She wants us to recognize these towns and their complexities, not idealize them, or the opposite. So she says, sure, it doesn't really matter. You can describe this town as having central heating, subways. If that's stuff you think is helpful for life and making life easier, then have at it. And it's an interesting reference to washing machines, because remember all the big piles of laundry in BTS's Spring Day video? That's what it made me think of. We will get to more direct BTS connections in a minute. Part 2 is really dark, and we're just going to brush over that and not go into the details, but it describes the conditions that child has to put up with. Part 3 has 2 really, really interesting passages about the townspeople's reactions when they find out about this child and the conditions that child has to live in that their happiness is actually predicated on. Quote, "Their tears let the bitter injustice dry when they begin to perceive the terrible justice of reality and to accept it. Yet it is in their tears and anger, that trying of their generosity, and the acceptance of their helplessness, which are perhaps the true source of splendor of their lives. This is no vapid, irresponsible happiness. They know that they, like the child, are not free. They know compassion. It is the existence of the child and their knowledge of its existence that makes possible the nobility of their architecture, the poignancy of their music, the profundity of their science. It is because of the child they are so gentle with children. They know that if the wretched one were not there sniveling in the dark, the other one, the flute player, could make no joyful music as the young riders line up in their beauty for the race in the sunlight of the first morning of summer. Now do you believe in them? Are they not more credible? But there is one more thing to tell, and this is quite incredible. They go on. They leave Omelas. They walk ahead into the darkness, and they do not come back. The place they go towards is a place even less imaginable to most of us than the city of happiness. I cannot describe it at all. It is possible that it does not exist, but they seem to know where they are going, the ones who walk away from Omelas. Unquote. That is the final sentence of the story. So let's back up and unpack this. It is their tears and anger, the trying of their generosity and acceptance of their helplessness, which are their source of splendor in their lives. Basically, she's saying they know that their happiness is predicated on something else. This isn't just some blind faith in the town and the way the town operates. They know how it works, but they still see the trade-off as worth it, and they find themselves relating to the child because they are not free either. I don't think the author is here trying to equate those different struggles, but more so it's about pointing out the fact that even the town living in the most utopian definition of a utopia place ever, even they have the problems of life that can't escape them. I'm reminded of this quote from author H.G. Wells: "There is no intelligence where there is no need of change." Think about that. There is no intelligence where there's no need of change. If everything was this perfect utopia, then people wouldn't be using innovative, creative mindsets. They wouldn't need to be experiencing this ingenuity, this sense of camaraderie in problem solving, this teamwork ethic, this sense of trying to contribute to society to make it better if it's already as good as it's going to get. I think she intentionally chose such a disturbing image to really leave you with a powerful impact from the story that sends home the message that there is no intelligence where there is no need of change. So she just wanted to find a stark way to force you to think about this happening. So it's less about that actual circumstance and more about realize that no matter how idyllic you're trying to make something, we are humans, we will make things that are flawed, and there's no such thing as a utopia. There will always be some sort of trade-off, and of course this is just an extreme way of bringing that point home. It's really interesting that she says, "Now do you believe them?" And then she ends the story by saying it's possible the town they walked towards when they left doesn't even exist, but they seem to know where they're going. To me, that actually ties back to what we were talking about in the story of Damien the other day, with the premise being, look, if you truly follow where your soul guides you, where your conscience guides you, if you feel like you're walking without a map to your destination, as long as you trust your gut instinct, you will get there to where you're destined to go. So it leaves a very interesting philosophical and psychological question of what would you do if you are in a town where someone suffers at the expense of many who are happy. Morally, it's an awful question to have to ask. So it's just a really interesting thought experiment that she writes about here. She describes them as taking, the trains out of there, and that reminded me of BTS's trains in Spring Day that they used to get out of Omelas. They just decide to truly live with themselves. Anywhere is better, but here I can't keep staying here. So they just wander off and trust that they will find their way. And finding their way is what BTS's story is all about, what Damien's all about, and what Omelas is ultimately all about. Now that we know the story of Damien from the last episode, let's walk through the 7 BTS individual. Each member had their own solo film in the Wings music video era, and those stories, I think, come into a new focus now that we know the story of Damien, and we can look at how each of those Wings music video era videos actually shows the next step in the timeline of that Damien story, the next part of the chronology of Sinclair's life. In the ways that is emulated, I think, then bring into full focus actually the connections between Omelas and BTS's work and Damien. It's all combined to bring me to 3 main takeaways. I'll stop jabbering on about my theory and just get to the substance. So video 1 is Jungkook's. It's called Begin, and remember that is the one where he is in his parents' house that makes up one realm as they describe it. He's not even exposed to the alternate universe yet. He just knows this realm of model behavior, of strict standards, of just going to school and doing what you're told. That is when he sees a self-portrait of himself and looks very startled and upset by it. He literally fears himself. Put a pin in that note. Video 2 is Jimin's for the song Lie, and that has some apple imagery. And remember, in Damien, his first elaborate lie is about stealing apples. Now he's gonna meet Damien for the first time, and he has this story to brag about as a young kid about what theft he committed. A very small taste of what's to come in his rebelliousness. Video 3 is V's for Stigma. That is when V is vandalizing things and gets questioned by the police and everything. So he's been fully exposed to that other realm, that dark world at this point. Just like Damien introduced Sinclair to. A lot of rebellious behavior, and some that Sinclair, of course, discovered on his own. Video 4 is Suga's for First Love, which has the piano imagery, and remember Pistorius is a character in Damien who becomes an organ player who is a close friend and confidant for Sinclair. Video 5 is called Reflection, that's RM's. In that video he tattoos a bird image onto him, and after he gives himself a bird tattoo, he hears the phone ringing, runs to the phone booth, but it's padlocked, and he can't get inside to answer the ringing phone. That's a big symbolic video that, of course, references that bird. Because remember, in Damien, the bird gets bigger in Damien's dreams as the story progresses, and and Sinclair dreams about the bird more and more. Then the bird, engulfs him. It's all a symbol for the bird letting him break free from that first realm and explore the second as he pleases as he becomes an adult. The more the bird imagery is incorporated into Damien and BTS characters' worlds, the more free they have become on their journey. So RM is fully embracing this bird imagery at this point in Video 5. Also symbolic is the fact that he can't get back to the phone booth, which I interpret here as being about how there's this point where Sinclair feels like he doesn't want Damien to leave him. He's scared of being alone again. Then it seems like he can't go back. Remember, he was irritated when he went back for a holiday break to his parents' house again. Now he sees that realm in a whole new light, very critical of it, wants to go back to the other world. And so at this point, RM is struggling to get back to the other world. He's become so enamored with the new rebellious side of life that going back to his parents' house, that first realm, is proven to be difficult. He doesn't even have the right language or communication ability anymore with those people. Video 6 is called Mama. That's J-Hope's video, which has this motherly figure imagery throughout, naturally. And remember, in Damien, Frau Eva becomes an important character later on. Both characters have an interesting but different dynamic. Damien teaches him a lot and pushes him to think in new ways, and Frau Eva is just a supportive motherly figure. So both key relationships in his life, just taking different forms, different types of benefits they add to his life. And Video 7 is Jin's video for Awake. The apple, the piano, the mother holding the baby, all those previous symbols are brought back. And this time, remember what I told you to put a pin in earlier, that thought about Jungkook staring at his reflection and being scared of it? Then in the last video, Jin is staring at his reflection, but he's not scared of it. He just stares at it. He sees himself in the mirror and he is fine with it. That, I think, is supposed to indicate some growth. Self-love, self-awareness, all of that. And then the book Damien ends with that scene where Sinclair is left alone, but he's gonna have to learn to be okay with it, because Frau Eva and Damien have decided to leave him. They can no longer be these people walking beside him in life, but he says, hey, you can handle this, you've got this. And if you ever feel alone like you need us, just know we've always been within you. And so that realization can bring a sense of calm to Sinclair and a sense of confidence. Hence the name of this video, Awake. Jin feels like his eyes are open and he's ready to take on the world now. So tying everything together, there are three big, broad takeaways I have from Omelas, BTS's videos, and Damien. The first one is that groupthink and this collective sense of feeling a shared emotion and a shared train of thought, a shared experience, the ripple effect of a few people experiencing an emotion in an environment is really huge. And then pretty soon the whole environment is that jovial, happy summer celebration where everyone's forgetting their trouble. That groupthink is looked at in Damien as well, because he's in school, he's being taught all of these standard textbook definitions and interpretations of stories, and he begins to question those, but it takes a bit of provoking from Damien. At first, he just blindly accepts the interpretations that he's being taught, but then he needs some encouragement to step outside of that groupthink, that rote memorization. Through Damien, he had to find the tools within himself to do that. He could not just do it without someone helping him break free of that hold of groupthink. And in BTS's videos, the characters struggle individually, but when they are together, they have these moments of happiness. And when one of them looks like they're cheering up, the others follow suit. They realize they can get through this life as long as they stick together because they can boost each other's spirit. Second big takeaway is about that camaraderie and the importance of it in your life, even if it has to take the form of imaginary friends like in Damien. You can simultaneously find the courage to do things on your own and find courage through encouragement from other people. So you can hold on to and value your relationships while simultaneously working on yourself. It's not a trade-off. And that is what BTS's music is all about. And their ultimate message is the importance of friendship and getting to know and love yourself too. And both things do not have to happen one after the other in a certain order. It's just their music encompasses that complex back and forth that happens throughout your life. With Omelas, the main lesson is that you can form a sense of independence from your decision to leave that town because you can't take it morally. It's too reprehensible. Your conscience won't let you live with that realization. So you leave the town. You're doing that of your own accord, but that does not neglect the fact that you realize there was safety in numbers. It's not like one person every now and then defects. They are all collectively, there seem to be like these mass exoduses from Omelas. So there is safety in numbers. Someone stood up and said, hey, it's okay to feel this bad. It's okay to feel this guilty. Let's leave. And then people follow suit. So basically, it's about that complex mix of celebrating your choice to stand out from the rest, and you standing out from the rest will help people after you follow in your footsteps. Those things may sound contradictory, like following the pack versus going your own way, but that's the point. That brings me to lesson 3. The limitations of language to describe the human experience. This is what I talked about a lot in the Damien episode, so I won't go into it too much more here, but just to say that life is so layered and nuanced and complex and just so incredibly diverse of an experience for everyone that language fails to fully encapsulate it ever. That's what's so powerful about music and music videos, that it brings audio and visuals to a story to help you better understand the dimensions it carries. And BTS has done that very well because their songs can invoke one feeling in you, and then watching the videos adds another layer of emotions for you, and so on. The limitations of language come into focus when we think about black and white thinking and binary ways of viewing the world, like we talked about at length on the Damien episode. In Omelas, there is not a dichotomy between living in a utopia and living in a miserable place. They have a bit of both. And the author talks about how it's not about these people being just super ditzy and ignorance is bliss. She insists they are intelligent, passionate people who are aware of their surroundings. And how to reconcile those seemingly contradictory instincts, that is something that language fails to explain for us. And with Damien's story, Sinclair cannot fully detach one realm from the other as much as it seems like he did. Over time, he begins to see value in both, and the need to thinking about the role of characters like Abraxas, who combine and embody everything good and evil, and understanding that mix is not something that can be torn into separate pieces. The limitations of language help explain how that, yes, they can tell a story about self-love and the importance of friendship. They can tell a story about knowing you have the tools within yourself to cope with the world and knowing the importance of helping other people get there too and have those relationships in your life. They talk about the importance of emotional openness, and they talk about the importance of just happy-go-lucky, jovial moments. Like in the town of Omelas, they can be happy and have layers to them. Aside from the specific symbols that bring to mind the story, like the flute playing, well, that's not really about the video, but it's about BTS's work. Then there's the washing machine references in the train station, the other symbols of either Omelas or just indicators of growing up, like opening the door to see the laundry room has replaced where their playroom used to be as kids. All these signs of youth disappearing, those bring home the message that the members are growing up whether they want to or not. The BTS members are showing in that video that they have learned to rely on each other and turn to each other to evoke that collective feeling and experience of joy and happiness when they gather together to goof off and have a food fight and stuff in the Spring Day video. So one, it's about the impact of your environment on how you feel and react to things. Two, it's about simultaneously working on independence and working with others in life. And three, it's about the limitations of language to summarize both of those variables. In the messiness of life and life's choices is what BTS's videos and stories continue to unravel and look at from different angles. There is some fan speculation about which BTS member is meant to represent this child in the Omelas story, but I think in terms of what characters BTS embodies from the literary influences they have, that's just about Damien, in my opinion. I think their characters are just embodiments of the Damien characters, not from the other influences they've had. If there was one of the members representing the kid in Omelas, it would probably be V, because he's left alone. Remember, he's by the train tracks and he's just left there while the other members get to take a train out of there, showing that disconnect between utopia and harsh reality, because he also, remember, embraces the disconnect, basically embodying Abraxas, or some sort of bird that mixes good and evil. His character is the one who's most rebellious, dabbling in the Realm 2 as opposed to Realm 1, so I think he's representative of that combination of influences on your life, and so it would make sense for him to be the big symbolic character representing that contradiction in Omelas. But I think in general, the BTS characters represent the Damien characters, like Suga has to be Pistorius, the organ player. Jimin and J-Hope, I would argue, are most like Damien and Sinclair with their dynamics. We can talk about that more some other time, but I just see their relationship as pulling each other to and from the different world. Those are my main takeaways, and those are the things that have left me in a lot of thought about this story and the Spring Day music video. Later this week is a headline roundup about the latest news in the world of K-pop. Then next week we will go back to talking about different books and movies that BTS has been drawing inspiration from. Don't want to give away what those are yet, but we will continue this series of episodes. Thank you all for listening, and I will talk to you all soon for the headline-themed episode later this week.